Hey guys, welcome to another VATSIM video here on the AviationPro channel. In this video we're going to take a look at flight planning. We're going to take a look at how to make a flight plan and how to file it to VATSIM. Let's go. So guys, flight planning is key in aviation. You really need to have a good flight planning if you want to be able to execute your flight from A to B properly. And personally, I think that 50% of the flight actually involves flight planning, and then the rest of the work, the other 50% of the workload, is actually executing the flight. So you can see that flight planning takes up a big portion of importance for your flight. So in the previous video I already showed you where to find charts and how to interpret them, and actually that's already an important part of the flight planning process. So you know what your departure route looks like, how you're going to fly en route, and you know kind of what your arrival looks like. But now we're going to take a look at the actual flight planning, because you're going to have to file a flight plan when you want to fly on a VATSIM network, so that the air traffic controllers know where you're going and what route you're taking. And planning a flight properly will involve some more things than you think, so we'll just take it step by step. I'm going to be showing you how to create a flight plan using PFPX. Another great resource that I already mentioned in one of my previous videos and that I would like to mention is Simbrief. Simbrief.com is a great free website where you can also create flight plans for free. But I'm going to show you using in PFPX. It's going to be a bit more advanced, but the general principles should apply also to Simbrief. So we're going to take a look at how to create a flight plan in PFPX, then we're going to take a look at how to interpret that flight plan, and then we're also going to take a look at how to fill in the flight plan form on vPilot so that you can send your flight plan to the VATSIM servers. So guys, welcome to the briefing room. This is PFPX, as you can see, and I'm going to plan a flight from Amsterdam to Riga. I'm just going to use the same example as the VATSIM full flight that I made a while ago, and the same example as in the previous video with the charts, so you can kind of have an idea how that links together. So again, if you use Simbrief, this will look a bit different of course, but entering the data should be pretty similar. First of all, for PFPX it's important that you select an aircraft, so make sure that your aircraft database is up to date. We're going to be flying a cargo flight today. We're using the Boeing 747-400. So yeah, it's pretty easy to add a new aircraft. Just give it a registration number. Make sure you select the correct aircraft type and the engines and the units. And then pretty much the rest you can leave the same. You might want to change the cost index to something of your liking. So this cost index indicates how efficient your engine's going to run. So the lower the cost index, the more efficient your engines will run during the flight, and the higher the cost index, the less efficient, but the more speedy your flight will be. So if you, for example, need to increase your cruise speed, you can increase the cost index so that the engines burn more fuel but go faster, simply put. And the rest of the table you can pretty much leave the same. TopCat, if you have that, you can select the performance module here so that you can do some extra calculations. But for now I would just leave it like this. Okay, so we begin by adding a flight, and then we enter a call sign. So we're going to be flying Giant at Atlas Air. That's the call sign. So the IATA code is these two letters, number and a letter in this case, so 5 Yankee. Let's just give it the number 5421, whatever. And then the ICAO code is GTI 5421. Always remember that this can also be an alphanumeric call sign, for example 54 Delta or 54 Tango Uniform, whatever, you know. It can happen that there's an alphanumeric combination for your call sign, but in general you can just look up a real world flight maybe, and based on that you can use that call sign. I'm just going to leave it like this. So we're going to be flying from Amsterdam. I'm going to be adding the ICAO code here to Riga. It's going to be an international flight, and you can select whether it's scheduled or non-scheduled. Well, it doesn't really matter in this case. Then the date, so let's say we're going to fly today. Let's say we depart at, it's now 10:27. Let's say we depart at 12 o'clock local time, and that will be 11 o'clock Zulu time here, because there's a 1 hour time difference currently between the Zulu time and the Netherlands. So as you can see, if you put in the Zulu time here, it will already put in the correct local time. It's 1200, but in aviation you always use Zulu time basically. And then, yeah, the scheduled time of arrival is not really correct right now because we've not really selected an aircraft yet, so we'll not pay too much attention yet to that, but we're just going to select our Boeing 747 right here. So you can just click on that. And as you can see, the scheduled time of arrival already changes. The flight's about, the estimated en route time is about 2 hours. Okay. So we'll just save that, and then we can begin planning our flight. As you can see, it already draws a line here on the map, and we just plan our flight. And it's basically a matter of going from top to bottom as with the charts, going through all the boxes, make sure that you have included everything. So this is a rather simple flight, and I would really suggest that you start with these kind of simple flights, like Amsterdam to Riga. Is quite long already, but you could also do Amsterdam to Prague, London Heathrow to Geneva, Vienna to Frankfurt, whatever, you know. Those are really nice flights with a short amount of flight time and with an easy route without too much complexity, basically. So we have our flight and we have our call sign, and then we have Amsterdam to Riga. You're gonna have to select the takeoff runway, and you can use the weather function for that to determine what runway will be active. A lot of people always ask me, how do I determine the active runway? Well, it's actually pretty easy. What PFPX will do once you've selected the departure and arrival airport is display the weather information. So we can see here, this is the METAR of Amsterdam. So Amsterdam on the 17th of November at 08:55 Zulu. The wind is 190 degrees 4 knots. Visibility is good. View at 4000, temperature 6, dew point 5, QNH 1027, no SIG. So based on this information, you can see that the winds are from the south. So you can anticipate that probably runway 24 is active. I'm not really sure, but probably. At Riga, and you can use the charts to look up what runways there are in the first place. But at Riga, at 17th November, 9:20 Zulu, the wind is from 210 degrees, 11 knots, so a little bit from the southwest. And visibility is 6,000 meters, light rain, broken 600, overcast 1200, temperature 6, dew point 6, QNH 1011. And then there's some information about the braking action, and there's no significant change. So probably runway 18 is active. Well, another way to determine the active runway, which I find very handy, is to use flight radar. So with flight radar, you can kind of see, hey, where are the aircraft in the real world landing? And as you can see, actually in Amsterdam, runway 36 left and 36 center are now active. Now on VATSIM, of course, first and foremost, you depend on the the active runway that is assigned by the air traffic controllers on VATSIM. So on VATSIM, likely they will only use one runway for landing and one for takeoff. But if there's no ATC and you want to determine the active runway, for example, 36 left is used a lot. You can see that 36 left is actually used. Despite the the wind from the south, we still have a northern departure, and that's probably just because the wind is light enough for this to happen. So you can kind of check that, and then you can also go to your arrival airports, Riga, and then hope that there's a flight that has just landed there, for example this one, and indeed you can see that this guy has landed at runway 18. So we can just assume that will be the active runway. And of course, depending on when you plan the flight, the weather may change a little, so you can also read the TAFs, the terminal area forecasts right here. For example, there's a probability of 30% that it's temporarily between 06 and 08 Zulu, that there's a visibility of 7,000 and mist and fog, and then becoming between 10 Zulu and 13 Zulu, the wind is going to change to 270 degrees at 8 knots, for example. So you can already kind of anticipate what the wind will be. So based on the wind information in the METAR and the TAFs, you can actually look up what runway will be active. I'm just going to assume runway 36 left right now for departure and landing runway 18. Then you have to put in the taxi time. Well, knowing that I'm parking at this share apron, and as discussed in the previous video, it will take a very long time to taxi to runway 36 left, so let's say just 25 minutes. Taxi in time is probably just about 10 minutes, it won't take that long. Dispatch remarks, you can leave it empty. International flights. We have a scheduled service, 17th of November, and this is just all the same data. The estimated time of departure, you can just leave that empty. Then we'll go over to the aircraft, and this is basically all the information that you already entered when you created a new aircraft, so you can just leave it as it is basically. The payload, you can click here this button to put in a random payload, and you can kind of compare it with your zero fuel weight to see how heavy you are. So in this case we're flying a cargo airplane, so we only can carry 5 passengers. Let's say we have 3 pilots on board indeed, and then we have some luggage, and then we have a lot of cargo. And as you can see, we're about 20 tons away from our max zero fuel weight, so we're quite heavy today. And you can just keep clicking that random button for different values. As you can see, this would be a flight which is very, very light. We're almost more than 100 tons away from our max zero fuel weight. So you can just play around with that. You can also enter values yourself. Let's just get a random value where we're kind of heavy. I kind of like that. 265. There we go. So a lot of cargo with us. Then the fuel. Now you have to select a fuel policy here in PFPX, and basically this fuel policy tells you how much fuel you should carry with you, how much extra fuel you should carry with you. And if you're flying in the European Union, for example, then you can just select this one. Otherwise, you can just pick the ICAO version. It depends a little bit on which region you fly into. I usually just select EU ops because I'm flying a European airline most of the time. In this case, probably I'm flying a US airline, but anyways, you can just pick regulations right here. And then yourself can also put in some extra fuel if you want to. So for example, if the weather at Riga would be very bad, I could add maybe 45 minutes of hold fuel so that I need to wait for the weather to clear up, for example. Or I just need some extra time in general, then you can also put that here. All right, so basically what you do, look at the weather, at the TAFs again. So if I'm going to depart at 11 Zulu, I'll probably arrive by 13 Zulu. So I'll just look at the TAF here. This one is probably the closest, temporarily between 1709 and 1712. The wind is 230 degrees 15, gusting 25. 3,000 light showers of rain, broken 700, broken 1,000, and cumulonimbus clouds. So as you can see, the weather can be pretty bad once I arrive. So I might take some extra fuel with me, maybe 30 minutes of hold fuel, just in case the weather is still so bad. I need to go around, I need to hold for the weather to go away. You never know. Okay, so it really depends on the weather. And there might be situations where you do not take any extra fuel at all. The rest of these, I will just leave them empty. You don't need them for now. Costs also, you don't use that. That's for calculating the actual fuel costs, and there's not really a point in flight simulation. The route, PFPX has its own functions. You can do an auto route. You can also just use the find function. So it finds a route in the route database, and you can kind of see if that route is okay. So if it lights up green, you will see that's okay, and once you selected the route, it will display right here. And as you can see, we depart out of Amsterdam, runway 36 left via Andik. That's going to be our first waypoint. And then via uniform November 873 to the Juist waypoint. And then uniform Papa 729 to Dosur. And then direct Nislo, direct Orvik. So a route always consists, first of all, starting with a waypoint, and then an airway, and then another waypoint, and then an airway, and then another waypoint. But it also might contain some direct segments. It really depends. So make sure you do not just fly plan from waypoint to waypoint to waypoint. That's not the way to do it. You want to make sure that you fly via airways if you can. So for example, you can here view all the airways that are here, and then based on that information you can kind of generate your route. And as you can see, once you select a runway, it already selects one of the departure routes. So let's just assume we're going to fly this departure route and this arrival route. We end up at Orvix. Alright, so I would click the validate button right here. If you're flying in Europe especially, there are a lot of restrictions on routes, so you can use this button to validate your flight plan. So we'll just check if anything comes up. And as you can see, no errors, so it has passed the validation. If any errors pop up, you might want to try to see if you can solve it somehow. It's sometimes a bit hard to do. If not, I would not worry about it too much. Controllers on VATSIM probably will not say anything about it, or they will just give you an instruction to, circumvent the error that you made in your flight plan. But in general, it should be okay. And so yeah, this is what's using the find function of PFPX. There are some other ways at finding routes. One great website I would recommend is this real world flight plan database. Here you can view real world flight plans, and that's pretty cool. So you can just use the search function right here, for example, and we type in, let's say we're gonna fly from Heathrow to Nice. So departure ICAO code and destination ICAO code, and we can just find flight plans. And then here with these colors you can see whether this flight plan is recent or not. So as you can see, this one is from the 10th of November, so that's pretty recent. That's like 7 days ago. So then you can just click on that call sign, and then you can just pick out this route, for example, and then you have a route which hopefully is pretty valid. So that's a quite cool way, and yeah, you can of course use flight plans from all over the world this way. So that's pretty convenient. And so if you have a recent flight plan and your AIRAC data is up to date for your aircraft and in the PFPX, then it's likely that this route is also correct. Another website that you can use is Flightaware. If you're flying in the US, for example, this is a great website to find real-world routes of current aircraft that are currently flying in the sky, actually. So let's say you're flying from Newark to Seattle, and we just click the search function, and then you can select one of the call signs, for example this one, United 1696. And you can see this flight has already been completed, and if you scroll down a little bit you can see the actual route. So you can just use this route in PFPX for your flight planning. So this is a great website for US flights. Unfortunately, if you search for European flights it will track them, but it will not have a route. But for US domestic flights you usually do have a route, so that's pretty cool. So the main point here is just make sure you have a correct route and validate it, and then you should be fine. Then alternates, you can just use this function, the find function, find any airport that's kind of close. Of course the airline might not divert to all airports, so you just select one that is most convenient for you. I'll just select Tallinn, quite a bigger airport with a good long runway for a 747. So we'll just hit that one, and then you can find a route for that as well. And I would just leave it like this. So if we need to divert for any reason, if the weather is very bad or there has been an accident on this runway, we can easily fly this route to Tallinn, as an alternate. Okay, so that basically completes the entire flight plan. And just make sure that you go over everything once more, make sure everything is correct, make sure all the buttons are green, and that indicates PFPX that your flight plan is good to go. And if you click on the weather and NOTAMs, once you selected a alternate airport, you can also see the weather there. So there we go. Then we basically just click on compute flight. Now the flight has been computed, and we can also, if you have the TopCat module for PFPX, calculate takeoff and landing performance. For example, let's do that. Takeoff, let's say we're gonna fly with flaps 20, thrust configuration optimum, air conditioning is gonna be on, the weather at Amsterdam, we might need some engine NTIs, I'm not sure, and we just calculate that. There we go, and we apply that to the flight plan. And then also for the landing you can do that the same, flaps 30. We're gonna do a manual landing with air conditioning on, and NTIs, we might need some NTIs actually. So there we go, we'll just calculate that and hit apply. So we'll just release the flight, and then we can print a flight plan, OFP, and right here you can select some of the stuff that you want. For example, if you want to have a summary of the payload and the fuel, and then of course, well, I would just tick all these boxes to cover pages you don't really need, and the NOTAMs and the track messages usually you also don't need for a simple route like this. So we'll just print a PDF, and then we can click OK. So this is the flight plan in PDF format, and again, as with the charts and with the flight plan filling itself, just review this from the top to the bottom. So our call sign for today is Giant 5241. We're going to be flying from Riga to, or from Amsterdam to Riga. And then here we got all the fuel planning. And first of all, we have the trip fuel. That's the actual fuel that you need for the trip itself. So that's almost 17 tons, and that provides fuel for 1 hour and 39 minutes. So that's just the flight time basically. You have some contingency fuel, which is just a percentage of the fuel that you need to have left when you arrive at the airport. So that's 849 for 6 minutes. We have hold fuel that we entered ourselves for Riga, which is for 30 minutes. So that's almost 4 tons of fuel. Then we have the alternate fuel, the fuel that you require for your alternate destination to reach Tallinn. So that's 6.5 tons for 32 minutes. Then we have the final reserve fuel. That's the fuel that you really have to have left in the tanks when you land at Riga. That's just part of the European policy basically. So that's for 30 minutes, and it equates to about 4 tons of fuel. The minimum takeoff fuel is as the name says, the minimum amount of fuel that you need to have with you once you take off. Basically, that's all the above fuels so far added together. So that coincides with the minimum takeoff fuel. But then you also have some taxi fuel for 25 minutes. And then if you add that to the minimum takeoff fuel, you end up with your release fuel, which is this one. So that's 34 tons, providing fuel for about 3 hours and 41 minutes. So that's the release fuel. This one is really the fuel that you're going to take with you and that you have to load in your aircraft once you start up the sim. And then we have some arrival fuel. So that's the amount of fuel that you would arrive with at Riga without diverting and with all the reserve fuel still on board. All right. Now, when it comes to putting a reserve fuel in the flight management computer of your aircraft, I usually pick the alternate fuel plus the final reserve fuel. I add them together, and that will be my reserve fuel that I put in the FMC. So that's about 10.7 tons. Then we have the load planning right here. So that contains all the information about the weight of the aircraft. So the empty weight, the payload for today, which mainly consists of cargo, almost 100 tons. Then we have the zero fuel weight, so what the aircraft would weigh without any fuel. So just using the empty weight and the cargo weight, the payload weight. If you add them together, it will add up to this amount, 265,686. Then the fuel weight, of course, that you have with you. The ramp weight is the zero fuel weight plus the fuel weight. So the weight that you will be at the ramp. And then once you taxi and once you take off, you have burned some fuel, and that will be your takeoff weight at Amsterdam. And then, of course, when you land at Riga, you will have some weight as well. You will be 281 tons, basically. So that's the stuff that you can put in your flight management system again. So when you load up the aircraft, what the value that you can pick is the zero fuel weight. You just enter 265.686 as the zero fuel weight, and then in aircraft like the PMDG, it should automatically distribute that weight accordingly. Then over to the next page. Again, we have some information. Most important, probably call sign and departure and arrival with the runway. We can see which type of aircraft we're flying, and we can see the elevation at both airports. We have the cost index of 30. Our initial altitude is going to be flight level 350, and the fuel bias is kind of a number to see what your aircraft will burn in reality in comparison to the flight plan. So when it's lower than 100%, your aircraft will actually burn less fuel than what's on the flight plan. But if it's higher than 100%, then the aircraft will burn more fuel than what is stated on the flight plan. But you can just ignore that for now. We have our route, and then we have some distances. So first of all, we have the Great Circle distance, 721. That's kind of the distance between the two airports over the ground, just a direct line. The flight plan distance, including all the waypoints and the routes that we're going to take. and the air distance, that's the distance that you would travel through the air. And then we have some average values here. The average ISO deviation, that's kind of determines how much your temperature differs at your cruise altitude from the normal temperature at that altitude. The average wind tells you something about the average wind. You can put it in your flight management system for your aircraft to calculate the route, and the average wind components kind of to get an idea of what this route will have. So in this case we have a nice tailwind of 35 knots, so that should speed the flight up quite a bit. Then right here we have some more information. As you can see, we have some more information about our weight, and also the planned and the max zero fuel weight, the takeoff weight and the landing weight. What is most important here is again that you have the fuel. We already saw the fuel amounts earlier, and what you really need here is probably when you fill in the flight plan in vPilot is the ATC route. So that's the route that we picked and that we're going to plan to fly. So that's this one. And next we have a nice overview of all our waypoints, and basically you have all the waypoints from your SIT and then your route, and then as you can see here we have the top of climb right here, and the top of climb has some important information that you will need to enter in your flight management system. We're going to take a look at that in a later video, but you can see, okay, we end up at flight level 350. Our wind is going to be 286 at 043 degrees there, and our true airspeed at the top of climb is going to be 476 knots. And then we have all the rest of the waypoints basically. So yeah, that's of course some good information to have. Then we have some more wind information here on the different flight levels. Again, this is information that you can enter in your FMC. For example, the descent winds. So you can just enter that in the VNAV descent page of your aircraft. And then we have here the ATC flight plan. A lot of people usually put this in the remarks section of their flight plan on vPilot. It gives the air traffic controller some more information. For example, it gives some information about when you reach certain air traffic control departments. So we reached Echo Delta Delta Victor ATC region in 17 minutes into the flight. And then we reach the Echo Kilo Delta Kilo ATC region in 31 minutes into the flight. So that's Copenhagen. Next is going to be Scandinavia, or Sweden, I should say. And then 1 hour and 10 minutes into the flight, we reach Riga. And we can also see the registration of the aircraft and also the date of flight, things like that. So that's what you can put in the remarks section. We're going to take a look at that in a minute. And then here, of course, again, we have all the weather that I just showed you before. So the METAR and the TAFs at the airport. And it's good to review the weather at both of the airports, so you really have a good idea of what's going to go on. And in this case, let's take a look at Riga, for example. So the wind is from 210 degrees 11 knots. So if we're landing at runway 18 right, we know that we have a little bit of a crosswind when we're going to land. And of course, that's very important to realize. So we're going to have a crosswind from the right. The visibility is 6,000. As you can see, there's some light rain. And these are all things to take into account, right? It's part of the flight planning process. So make sure you give it a good review. We have broken clouds at 600, overcast at 1200. So very cloudy today. Then we have the temperature is 6 and the dew point is also 6. And yeah, it's important to look at these numbers because the closer the actual temperature is to the dew point, the more likely it is to get foggy. So especially in autumn here in Europe, when the dew point is when the real temperature is very close to the dew point, then it's likely to get foggy. Of course, you need QNH. So when you pass the transition level, when you descend into Riga, you need to set the local QNH, and this is where you can find it. And also, when you depart from Amsterdam, you also need to set the QNH, and as you can see, that is 1027. So that's very important information there about the weather. And the last part of your flight plan will contain some wind charts, and as we could already see on the average wind component, we have a lot of tailwind today. And it generates a couple of charts at different flight levels. So we're going to be flying at flight level 350 today, so it's best to use this one. that's closest to our flight. As you can see, PFPX has portrayed our route on this chart. And we can see two things here. It indicates on this chart whether there's some turbulence reported in this area. So this green area might contain some turbulence. For the rest of the flight, it looks pretty okay. As you can see, the red line is our route, and the yellow line that is a bit transparent is the direct route. And so, but we're going to be flying the red route, and you can see from these wind vanes right here, for example, what the wind will be along our route. So the way you decode this, and I will just zoom in a little. It's not a very high resolution, unfortunately, but that's okay. The way these things work is basically, if you have a wind flag right here, the wind goes from the top of the flag to the bottom of the flag. So it goes into this direction. So basically it goes from west to east in this case, right? And then you have different symbols on there. We have here the little triangle, the black triangle, which indicates 50 knots. Then we have a longer line right here that is indicating 10 knots. And then the smaller line here is indicating 5 knots. So you can just add them together. So for example, the wind at this point is going from west to east, and it's going to be 50 plus 10 plus 10 plus 5. So that's 75 knots. Well, I'll just take a look at another example a little bit further away, if I can zoom out. Yeah. So here we have another wind vane at our route. As you can see, it has shifted a little bit, so it's going from from the southwest to the northeast. And in this case, we have a wind consisting of 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 5. So that's 45 knots. Just not enough wind to draw a triangle. If it would be 50 knots, it would look like this. But that's not the case. So it's 45 knots, so that's 4 long lines and 1 short line. So 4 times 10 plus 1 times 5. And that's kind of how you decode this wind information on this chart. And it's good to give a review of this chart, and you can kind of discover patterns and where there's bad weather. Or you might see that you have a lot of headwind on your flight, and in that case you might want to take some extra fuel with you, or you need to take into account that you're going to burn a lot more fuel. And if that gets worse during the flight, you know that you might need to divert, for example. It can happen, you never know. Alright, so that's about the weather charts. So when you fully completed your flight plan, you are able to export it. I already showed you how to print it, but there are some other options. You can send it to the VATSIM service actually, which allows you to file the flight plan. I would not do so because it usually takes a little while before you actually connect to the VATSIM network, and you might want to change some things last minute. So we're just going to do it using vPilot. So it's probably the most easy way, and gives us another opportunity to check all the parameters of our flight plan. But what you can do is send it to SkyVector, and that's pretty cool. So let's take a look. So when you send it to SkyVector, it will just pump in the entire route for you. And you can have a good overview of what your route looks like en route. So we just have the high airways active. And here in SkyVector, you can turn on different layers. So let's remove the temporary restrictions and all that stuff, but we can maybe view some weather right here. So we can see it is a bit cloudy over here currently, and it looks like there's quite a bit of rain approaching Riga. So that's pretty cool, right? So you have a very, very nice overview of all the weather around your routes. And looks like we definitely don't want to fly to the UK and to Norway today, because it's very cloudy and rainy right there. For our route, it looks pretty fine. And as you can see, you can also turn on the wind barbs, kind of the same as I showed you in the wind charts that came with the flight plan, and it should be pretty similar. You can adjust the forecast time and the altitude at which you should display. So let's pick flight level 340, that's closest to our route, and we just want to have the wind at the current time point. So we can see indeed we still have that wind from west to east, and it looks like here over the Netherlands and over Denmark it's a little lighter than at the end of the route. At the end of the route we really have for example 50 plus 10, 60 knots tailwind, so that's pretty good. And the further we get to Riga, the bigger the tailwind component seems to get. So some pretty cool information. So let's take a look at how to fill in the flight plan form in vPilot. So if you want to, you can already park your aircraft at the gate and connect to the network without a flight plan and then fill it in. Or otherwise you can already fill it in and save it and then file it later. But anyways, in order to file it, you have to be connected anyways. I'm not right now, but that doesn't matter. So first of all, you select the flight type. We're going to be flying IFR, of course. Now I'm not really covering VFR in this tutorial series because I think IFR flying and flying airliners from A to B is the most common type of flying that you see on the VATSIM network. So yeah, just select IFR because we're doing an IFR flight. So using instrument flight rules. We're going to depart from Echo Hotel Alpha Mike, which is the ICAO code of Amsterdam, and then we're going to fly to Riga, which is Echo Victor Romeo Alpha. So again, ICAO codes. Alternate airport, as we planned, is Tallinn, and as you can see in the route right here, we have Tallinn. That's gonna be our alternate. So EETN, Echo Tango November. Then you have to fill in a departure time, and departure time is the time where you basically start moving from the gate. So departure time is not the takeoff time, so the moment that you take off from the runway. The departure time is actually when the ground crew removes those blocks away from the gear, so the off block time basically, and once you start pushing back from the gate. So that's really the time that your flight departs. So we planned for departure time of 11 Zulu. You can see that on the flight plan as well. Right here we have scheduled the time of departure 11 Zulu. Alright, so we'll just enter 1100 right here and it will be automatically Zulu. Then time en route, that's the time we're going to be spending in the air, and basically what you can use for that is the trip fuel. So that's the fuel that you require for the actual route that you're going to be flying. So that's 1 hour and 39 minutes. And then the fuel available in total is just the total amount of fuel you have available, so plus all the alternate fuel and the reserve fuel, things like that. So the total amount we have available is going to be our release fuel, which is 3 hours and 41 minutes. So 3 hours and 41. For the cruise speed, you can go to the top of climb on your flight plan. That's usually quite a good estimate of what your cruise speed is going to be. So here we have the top of climb, and as you can see here in this legend, it's a bit on the wrong page in this case, but anyways, we have our true airspeed and our ground speed, and you want to put in the true airspeed, as you can see in vPilot. So if we go to our top of climb, then we have here the speeds. So 476 is the true airspeed and 493 is the ground speed. So we're going to enter the true airspeed, which is 476. And again, our cruise altitude is going to be flight level 350. So we can put in 35,000 here, which is the same as flight level 350. Now, if you're flying a longer route, it's likely that your flight planner will include step climbs. And step climbs are just, as you burn more fuel, the aircraft gets lighter. And then at some point, it might be more efficient to fly at a higher altitude. So, for example, in this case, we could have a step climb that will take us from flight level 350 to flight level 370. In that case, what you fill in the flight plan is just the initial altitude. So you always put in the initial cruise altitude here. So you do not put your last altitude that you expect to climb at. No, you put your initial cruise altitude right here. Another little thing to mention about cruise altitudes, there's a basic rule of thumb that when you fly to the west, you have to fly at even flight levels, and if you fly to the east, you have to fly at odd flight levels. Now, this is true for most flights, and as you can see, we're flying to the east from Amsterdam to Riga, and indeed we're flying at an odd flight level 350. And then when we would have a step climb, we will not climb to flight level 360. No, we would climb to flight level 370. Now, it's not true for all countries, and sometimes it might be a bit hard to find. But again, using the resources that I mentioned before, for example, the real-world flight plan database, you can kind of look up, hey, what's the correct altitude for this flight on this route? Or you can look up on Flight Radar maybe and find a flight that is currently cruising. So of course there should be many up here. For example, this flight is still a little bit climbing, so maybe this one works better. Hey, this one is flying from New York to Warsaw, and it's flying at 41,000 feet. So indeed, that is probably a correct altitude for this route. Otherwise, pick a smaller airplane which is maybe cruising. For example, this one, Vienna to Minsk, seems to be descending. Not a good example. Here, this one, Budapest to Moscow, it's flying at 39,000 feet. So you can kind of assume that, you know, an odd flight level on this route is appropriate. Okay, so just keep that in mind, that you have to make sure that you file a odd or an even flight level, and it depends a little bit on which country and which route you're flying. But in general, if you have PFPX, then it will plan that flight level correctly for you. Then we go over to this page. We are in heavy aircraft because we're flying the Boeing 747, and this basically indicates the wake turbulence category, and the more wake turbulence your airplane generates, the heavier this category. And if you're in a heavy aircraft, you are one of the most heavy categories where you produce a lot of wake turbulence. So that's those wingtip turbulence that can cause other airplanes to basically experience a huge amount of turbulence when you get too close behind your aircraft. So if you're flying a 747 or any large jet, for example 767 or the 777, for example, those are all heavy aircraft. You can look that up. The equipment suffix refers to what kind of equipment you have on board in terms of navigation equipment. You can look that up as well, what the different navigation equipment codes are on Google. But in this case, I'm using L, and it's not a huge deal if you don't fill this in at all. It's just a little formality basically, but it kind of shows you, or shows air traffic controllers, what your aircraft is capable of. Then the route, we'll just put in the route that was generated by PFPX. So you include the first waypoint and then all the way to the last waypoint, and you do not include the SIDS or the stars in your route section in your flight plan on VATSIM. That's because SIDS and stars may change. So even though you planned for a certain SID in your flight planning, it doesn't mean that that SID will actually be flown when you actually depart, because the winds might have changed, for example, or runway might have changed, and in that case you're going to be flying another SID or another star. So putting that SID or star in the route section doesn't make any sense. So just use the bare route. So starting from your first waypoint on your route Andik to the last waypoint on your route Orvix. Then in the remarks section, as you can put in remarks, kind of the official way to do that is, for example, like this remark, and you can put something in like call sign is giant, because controllers might not know based on your ICAO code what your call sign is, but in general they do know. But what you can put in here is also this section. Just copy that straight in, and it gives air traffic controllers some information about your flight plan. But again, this is not a requirement. You can just leave the remarks section empty. But if you're a new pilot on the VATSIM network, I would put in something like new to VATSIM, like that. So the air traffic controllers kind of already anticipate, okay, you're a new pilot, maybe I should take a little bit of extra care for you, and then they know that if you make mistakes or something, then they know why. And then they might be able to help you out if necessary. Alright, so just keep that in mind that you can put that here in the remarks section. Finally, for the vPilot flight plan, you have to indicate your voice capabilities, so whether you can send and receive voice, whether you only receive voice, or whether you're a text-only pilot. Now, of course, I would highly recommend that you are a send and receive pilot, so that you can transmit over the radios and receive air traffic control. That's the most realistic setting and the easiest way to go for both the pilots and the air traffic controller. But if for some reason you cannot use voice, then you can also indicate that you will only receive voice, and then you reply to the instructions via text, or you would like to receive text instructions only, and then you also reply via text. But in my case, of course, I'm using a good headset, and I have no problems with that, so I'm just using the send and receive mode. So if that's all filled in, just make sure you give it another review, make sure everything is correct, and when you are connected to the VATSIM network, you should be able to file the flight plan. it will indicate on vPilot that the flight plan has been sent, and then you're good to go. So guys, thanks for watching this video. I hope you found that helpful. As you can see, flight planning might take up a lot of time before you actually start the flight, but the more flight planning you do, the more acquainted you will get with it, and it should be going faster afterwards. But as you can see, flight planning is really important and really allows you to properly execute your flight once you're actually going to make that first VATSIM flight. So if you have any questions or comments, make sure you leave them in the comments section below. And in the next video, we're going to take a look at how to actually fly and navigate through the VATSIM virtual skies. I'm going to show you what an IFR flight kind of should look like, how you navigate using the flight management system of your add-on aircraft. And this will all coincide with the charts that we viewed in the previous video, and also with the flight plan that we created in this video. Okay, so we're not going to communicate with air traffic controllers yet, but I'm going to be showing you the most important navigation and flying techniques that you really need to master before you're actually going to fly your first flight on the VATSIM network. So thanks for watching this video here on the AviationPro channel. If you want to check out some more videos, make sure you do so. And if you'd like to support the AviationPro channel, if you like these videos in this tutorial series, make sure you check out the description for different ways of supporting the AviationPro channel, because your contribution is very much appreciated. Thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next one.